Auburn is a bustling city with a vibrant and storied history. The history ranges from the Penobscot Purchase over 300 years ago to the paramount era of the shoe industry, even to the World Wars and beyond. There is lots to do in Auburn, and even more to see. The land of Auburn, Maine was originally part of the Penobscot Purchase, which was land that was bought in 1714 by an association of people from Boston and Portsmouth. This purchase followed the Treaty of Portsmouth, which brought peace between the Abenaki Indians and the present-day settlers of Maine. However, the Massachusetts General Court granted a large part of the land to veterans of the 1690 Battle of Quebec in 1736. Many conflicting claims led to prolonged litigation, consequently delaying the settlement of any of the land until after the French and Indian War. In 1786, Auburn was first settled as part of Bakerstown, which was later renamed Poland when it was incorporated by the Massachusetts General Court in 1795. It then became part of Minot, formed from parts of Poland, and incorporated in 1802. Auburn would then be formed up from parts of Minot and incorporated on February 24, 1842, as a town. The name was inspired by Auburn, a village that was either real or fictitious, featured in the 1770 poem The Deserted Village by Oliver Goldsmith. Auburn was originally part of Cumberland County, but then became part of Androscoggin County at its creation in 1854. As Auburn annexed the towns around it, including part of Poland in 1852, Minot in 1873, and all of Danville, first called Penobscot, in 1867, it grew geographically into one of the largest municipalities in all of Maine. Incorporated as city on February 12, 1868, Auburn in 1917 would be the first city in the state to adopt a council-manager form of government. Farms supplied grain and produce, but after the construction of the bridge across the river to Lewiston in 1823 and the arrival of St. Lawrence and Atlantic Railroad from Portland in January 1848, the community developed into a mill town. The mills were built to operate by water power generated from falls on the Androscoggin and Little Androscoggin rivers. In 1835, the factory system of shoe manufacturing originated in Auburn. Other firms produced cotton and woolen textiles, as well as carriages, iron goods, bricks, and furniture. Auburn's shoe factories attracted many French-Canadian immigrants, many of whom arrived by train. By 1890, the population was about 12,000. The population continued to grow steadily until about 1960, when the population was 24,500. Though some arrived by other means of transportation. Androscoggin County comprises the Lewiston-Auburn Metropolitan Statistical Area and partially includes in the Lewiston-Auburn, Maine Metropolitan New England City and Town Area. Its county seat is Auburn, Maine. When demand for a new county emerged after a resident of the rapidly growing town of Lewiston complained of the long distance that they had to travel to reach Wiscasset, the county seat of Lincoln County, in which Lewiston was originally located, the idea of making a new county was discussed. Additionally, it was seen as impractical that Auburn, Lewiston's direct neighbor, was a part of Cumberland County. As the partnership between the two towns grew, and the case for the towns to be in the same county grew, plans were discussed. Among these was Auburn being incorporated into Lincoln County, but then the idea of a new county came to the table. The debate then became focused on where the new county seat would be, seeing as how both Auburn and Lewiston desired the title. It would eventually be put down to a vote in which Auburn would bribe Turner to give them their vote to become the county seat. Long before the time of the shoe factory era, West Auburn was known as Minot or East Minot. Early in the history of the town, there had been a shoe factory known as the Minot Shoe Company. The company numbered among its stockholders, such as the well-known local names as Ladd, Howard, Packard, Briggs, Crafts, Holmes, Johnson, Bailey, Ricker, and Kingsley. By the late 19th century, the manufacturing of shoes had become the predominant industry, and in 1835, the factory system of shoe manufacturing originated in Auburn. In 1855, the total production of Auburn shoe shops was about $1 million annually. But when one discusses the success of the shoe industry, we must look at the man who started it all. Ira Cushman, one of the pioneers of bootmaking and shoe manufacturing in Maine, began operations in a small, primitive square building in West Minot. In 1855, Ira Cushman had borrowed $2,000 from his father and hired out some of the work from farm families, but much of the work was done by Cushman himself. 9 years later, in 1864, Ira moved to Auburn, utilizing a small block on Main Street, outgrowing the space in just 4 years' time. Then, he went on to build a factory on Court Street that was 40 by 80 and 4 stories high. At the time, this was said to be the largest factory in the state, if not all of New England. It became known as Ira Cushman & Co. The working day for employees in these factories was from dawn until dusk, using kerosene lamps for light, and heat was provided by a barrel stove that used old boxes and leather scraps as fuel. Even the Mackay stitching machine was heated using alcohol lamps. The Mackay stitching machine is credited with revolutionizing the shoe manufacturing industry. The Mackay stitcher was a sewing machine created by inventor Lyman Reed Blake and improved by businessman and self-educated engineer Gordon Mackay. Prior to the introduction of this stitcher, shoes were hand-stitched in a time-consuming and piecemeal manner. The machine revolutionized the speed of footwear production by machine sewing the uppers to the soles. Had this machine never been invented, the shoe industry today would be very different. It may still be done by hand, and would not nearly be as efficient. In 1917, one factory in Auburn was producing 75% of the world's supply of white canvas shoes. However, after World War II, the shoe industry began to decline, and between 1957 and 1961, the largest manufacturers closed their factories. It was near midnight on August 21, 1972, when the final walls of the Cushman Hollis building were knocked down. Several hundred people had gathered to watch the final hours of the important landmark in the history of the shoe city. And thus, with the destruction of the Cushman Hollis shoe factory, Auburn closed easily its largest chapter and moved forward. One of the largest labor disputes in Maine history occurred in Lewiston and Auburn in 1937. The Lewiston-Auburn shoe strike lasted from March to June, and at its peak encompassed 4,000 to 5,000 workers on strike. The workers demanded higher pay, a shorter work week, better working conditions, and union representation. The police and workers, including many women, fought alongside of the workers. The manufacturers offered a 10% wage increase, however, this was refused by the strikers. After the workers attempted to march across the Androscoggin River from Lewiston to Auburn, Governor Lewis Barrows sent in the Maine Army National Guard to control the situation. The Lewiston Evening Journal depicted this as Red Wednesday. However, a town can't operate without order. That's where the Auburn Police Department comes in. In the late 1800s, the Auburn Police Department began with a single night watchman. By the 1930s, the force was primarily made up of constables, which were a peace officer with limited policing authority, typically in a small town. The policemen in 1898 were Harry C. Benson, Fred L. Austin, Samuel Ratcliffe, Charles Small, and Guy A. Wilkins. Prior to the year 1849, there was no organized effort to control fire in the village that was growing around Lewiston Falls. However, that year, the Lewiston Falls Village Corporation was formed and authorized to raise money for the purchase, repair, and preservation of one or more fire engines, hose, and other apparatus for the extinguishment of fire. Additionally, there were also instructions to construct reservoirs and aqueducts to supply water for the engines, as well as to erect and maintain suitable engine houses and organize and maintain an efficient fire department. The fire of New Auburn started in a repair shop behind a gasoline station on Mill Street just after lunchtime on May 15, 1933. It spread rapidly through the tenements and shops. By sundown, the fire had consumed New Auburn. 249 buildings were destroyed along a 600-foot wide area of land from Pulsford Street half a mile southeast, almost to Loring Street. Of the area and buildings destroyed, it was primarily occupied by low-income mill workers. According to the National Fire Protection Association report, 422 families and 2,167 people were displaced by the fire, and much of the New Auburn neighborhood was destroyed. Following the fire of New Auburn, yet another disaster struck. The flood of 1936 began on March 11, 1936, and was a constant downpour that occurred for 14 days and engulfed all of New England. The Androscoggin rose to record levels. The flood burst dams, wiped out roads, ruined businesses, and washed away homes. As many as 200 people were killed and 14,000 were left homeless.
The National Broadcasting Company presents a special flood bulletin. The death toll in the worst flood the East has known in years is steadily mounting. Rivers swollen by rains and melting snow are still raging through the 6 New England states and the states of New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, Ohio, Maryland, West Virginia, and Virginia. Property damage is mounting in the millions. The Connecticut River was out of its banks. Hardest hit were cities and towns along the Connecticut River Valley. Hundreds trapped in their homes were rescued in boats by state militia, police, and volunteers. Cities and towns were isolated as rampaging streams took out bridges, highways, and railroad beds. Power plants were put out of operation. A serious fuel and food shortage threatened, and the Weather Bureau could promise no relief.
The Auburn Public Library is a fascinating and sophisticated architectural statement in Auburn that sets itself apart from all the other buildings on Court Street. It was designed in a chateau-esque style with Romanesque elements and holds strong as a prominent city landmark. It was designed by architect William R. Miller, who also designed many other important buildings in Maine, including the Lawrence Library in Fairfield and the L. C. Bates Museum at the Hinckley School. Barker Mill is one of the few mansard-roofed mills that exists in Maine, since by the late 19th century, textile mills tended to be very simplistic in design. The Barker Mill, however, contains extensive decorative detail and was Auburn's one major venture in the textile industry for quite a while. This was the enterprise that gave the New Auburn area its favorable start as a center of business. The process began in 1870 with the acquisition of a large area along the Little Androscoggin River. The purpose was to develop water power for a textile mill. The result led not only to a dam and a 5-story mill, but to the sale of home building lots to the people who flocked to the area. The dam was completed in 1872 and the mill in 1873. Barker Mill opened in 1874 and produced cotton shirts and sheets. In 1888, it had employed 275 people. The William Briggs Homestead, built in 1779 and located on 1470 Turner Street, may well be the oldest surviving house in all of East Auburn. This is the oldest settled part of Auburn and was first known as Berry's Mills as part of the town of Minot. The land was originally granted to Samuel Berry of Cobbessaconte for his services as a scout and guide on Benedict Arnold's expedition to Quebec in 1775. William Briggs then acquired this land in 1779 and built a large homestead for him and his family. The Charles Cushman House, built in 1889 and located on 8 Cushman Place, is a great reminder of the affluence gained from the shoe manufacturing industry. It was built for Charles L. Cushman, the son of Era Cushman, the founder of one of the largest shoe manufacturing complexes in New England. The Holman F. Day House, built in 1895, located on 2 Gulf Street, was owned by Holman F. Day, an American author. It is now listed on the National Register of Historic Places. The Frank L. Dingley House on 291 Court Street was constructed in 1867 and from 1867 until his death in 1918 served as Frank L. Dingley's home. Dingley was an established editor of the Lewiston Evening Journal, Maine's second largest daily newspaper, for 57 years. The Engine House on Court and Spring Street has actually had 2 buildings, the first of which was built in 1870 but destroyed by a fire in 1878. It was then replaced by the current brick engine house, and in 1891 the first full-time fireman was appointed. Roque Block, named for Jacob Roque and located on 144 to 170 Main Street, was, at the time of its construction in 1871, the largest commercial industrial structure ever built in Maine. Over 1.8 million bricks were used in the construction of this enormous mansard building designed by Stephen and Coombs, 2 prominent architects in Lewiston, Maine. Although the war was declared on April 6, 1917, the mobilization of America's armed forces moved slowly. It was mid-July before Auburn's National Guardsmen were called to the colors. 64 of the 113 men in the 3rd Company Coast Artillery Corps, which assembled for duty, were from Auburn, Maine. Another 32 belonged to the 8th and 9th Companies. With smaller numbers enrolled in other units, Auburn's total National Guard contingent was 115 men. Another 15 men volunteered for the service in the 1st Maine Heavy Artillery, or the Milliken Regiment. This made it so 130 men from Auburn had volunteered for service early on in the war. With the inauguration of the draft, the wheels on the mobilization of troops began to pick up speed. Erland Tainter, a milkman, was on his delivery route for the Turner Center Dairying Association when a newspaper reporter approached him saying that he had been drafted for the service. He was the first of many men from Auburn to be called through this system. In all, volunteers and draftees, Auburn gave 816 men and women in the war effort. 725 served in the Army, 88 in the Navy, 6 in the Marines, and 3 were nurses. It was in this war that, for the first time, the names of women began to appear in the military rosters. Lenora A. Chaplin, Emma G. Fuller, and Elizabeth Watson were 3 women from Auburn who served in the Army Nurse Corps and base hospitals in the United States. The first man from Auburn to be killed in action was John A. Harrisburg, who gave his life to serve in the Marines and was killed at Soissons, France, on July 19, 1918. Ralph H. Burke was killed in the torpedoing of the USS Mount Vernon, on which he was an engine man 2nd class. Arthur E. Buck was killed in action in the Meuse-Argonne Offensive in October. 4 other men from Auburn died of wounds attained during the war. They were Harry M. Nightingale, Raymond E. Nason, Alden M. Gayton, and Ermund C. Williams, all in the Army. Diseases also took a toll on many members of the armed forces. The men who died were Wilfred O. Bernard, Harold E. Bragdon, Meyer L. Cantor, Leroy C. Drake, George F. Eveleth, Alfred LeBlond, Lawrence Pierce, and Arthur A. Young. Many men from Auburn received various awards for bravery and meritorious service. Among these were Dana T. Merrill of the Regular Army, a native of East Auburn, as 37th Division Chief of Staff, was awarded the Belgian Croix de Guerre and French Legion d'Honneur. Harry M. Nightingale of Company F, 103rd Infantry, was given a posthumous award of the Distinguished Service Cross for his actions on September 12, 1918, when he led his squad forward to attack a near impregnable machine gun nest. He continued to press on until only 2 of his squad remained, and kept going until he himself was mortally wounded. Sergeant James Miller and Corporal Guy Waite were cited in the 26th Division orders for bravery in the repulse of a German raid on April 10, 1918. Corporal Waite was then cited for a second time in a similar action on May 30th and 31st, and then Sergeant Miller again was cited for his bravery on September 12th through 14th, 1918. Germany formally surrendered on November 11, 1918. However, one of the last units to return home was the 56th Pioneer Infantry. They served basically as engineers, but were also trained to fight as infantry. In September, the unit went overseas for duty in France, and though they were not active in combat for the last 2 months of the war, the regiment was under severe artillery fire and suffered casualties. The men returned home for muster out in early July of 1919.
Here is the motion picture record released by the United States Navy of the havoc wrought by the Japs' sneak sky and sea raid on Pearl Harbor, America's mid-Pacific naval bastion. On December 7th, 1941, Japan, like its infamous Axis partners, struck first and declared war afterwards. Costly to our Navy was the loss of war vessels, airplanes, and equipment, but more costly to Japan was the effectiveness of its foul attack in immediately unifying America in its determination to fight and win the war thrust upon it, and to win the peace that will follow. The Japs copied their German masters in striking hard at airfields. Hickam Field, northwest of Honolulu, and the Ford Island Naval Plane Base were the first objectives of Japan's treachery. Scores of planes were bruised and battered by the Japs' aerial bombs. Many of these were demolished beyond repair. Direct hits were scored on hangars, and these were badly shattered. Equipment and airplane supplies were reduced to smoldering ruins. Here at the Naval Air Station is grim and positive evidence of Jap treachery. Here foul blows were struck, while Jap diplomats were talking peace in Washington. These pictures were made by a fearless cameraman who thought nothing of his personal safety to make possible this record for all posterity. A single lucky hit was responsible for the disaster that befell the Arizona when a Jap bomb falling directly through one of the battleship's funnels exploded in the engine room and set ablaze tons of fuel oil.
The men and women in Auburn who contributed to the success of the national effort from 1941 to 1945 served in all branches of the service. The 103rd Infantry was inducted into federal service on February 24, 1941, ostensibly for 1 year of training at Camp Blanding near Stark, Florida. 72 men from Auburn were on rolls of the Regimental Headquarters Company, 103rd Infantry Band, 1st Battalion Headquarters, C Company, and E Company. Officers and non-commissioned officers of Auburn's National Guard Company included Captain John S. Childs, Second Lieutenant Roscoe Staples, Master Sergeant Clarence E. Swift, Staff Sergeant Wilford A. Fields, Corporals Ralph E. Hamilton, Bernard R. Langley, Frank R. Houston, Benoit J. Sureau, and Louis L. Smith. The band leader was Warrant Officer Norman H. Merrill, and Sergeant Robert D. Eveleth, along with 8 other Auburn men, served with the band. Lieutenants Wilford H. Scowthorne and Paul W. Bean, and Corporals Reen Bulio, Armand L. Gardner, and Gideon Gaudet entered into the service with Lewiston's Rifle Company E, and Lewiston's H Company was First Sergeant Woodford O. Moore. Many non-commissioned officers and enlisted men left for officer candidate school during this time. Among these were Sergeant Donald C. Gaudier, who held the rank of colonel in 1968 and had been active in post-war National Guard work, Irving Isaacson, Gilbert E. Toothaker, Earl H. Jordan, Elmo Fortier, and John Norman. August and September, the 103rd Infantry, as part of its parent division, the 43rd Infantry, partook in the Louisiana Maneuvers, which were a series of U.S. Army exercises held around northern and western central Louisiana, including Fort Polk, Camp Claiborne, and Camp Livingston in 1940 and 1941. The exercises, which involved some 400,000 troops, were designed to evaluate the U.S.'s training, logistics, doctrine, and commanders. The regiment returned to its Florida camp the day before the Pearl Harbor attack, and soon all thoughts of returning to Maine after the regiment's active duty would be removed. On October 1st, 1942, the 103rd Infantry embarked from San Francisco in a 6-ship convoy en route for New Zealand. It arrived in Auckland on October 22nd. From here, the regiment began island hopping. It moved to New Caledonia in November, where outposts were established and training for jungle warfare, as well as amphibious combat occurred. The men of the 103rd Infantry then went into bivouac, a temporary camp without tents or cover, used especially by soldiers or mountaineers at Collie Point. This is where the regiment underwent their first hostile air raid. The troops were then loaded onto destroyers and sent to the Russell Islands on February 21st. On June 30th, after several months of security and preparation for defense of the Russell Islands, the 103rd Infantry took part in operations as the initial assault force on the New Georgia Island Group. Parts of the regiment took part in the landings at Rendova, Vanganu, Sigi Point, and Vairu Harbor. Worn down and depleted by a mixture of losses, jungle diseases, and other illnesses, the unit returned to New Zealand for rest, recreation, refitting, and replacements to enter the unit, as well as more training. As the rest of the war occurred, the 103rd fought in Aitape, New Guinea, when they assisted the 32nd and 112th Cavalry Combat Team repel the Japanese 20th, 41st, and 51st Divisions. The 103rd also fought on the San Fabian beaches at Antipolo, east of Manila. They also fought in the Santa Maria Valley, and they attacked the Shimbu Line. Finally, after intense patrolling and combat, the combat phase for the 103rd had ended. They went into a rest area at Cabanatuan, where the plans for the invasion of Japan were made. The dropping of the atomic bombs over Hiroshima and Nagasaki occurred, and VJ Day soon followed. By the end of the war, most of the men from Auburn who had started with the 103rd were no longer with the unit. Some had become casualties in combat, some were broken in health by tropical diseases, others had been reassigned to various units, and most of these remaining men had turned home from Luzon under the Army rotation system that was applicable to those on overseas duty. The 103rd Infantry had been in the Federal service for nearly 5 years, and had served overseas for 3 years in the South and Southwest Pacific theaters of the war. They had earned battle streamers for its colors with the names Guadalcanal, Northern Solomons, New Guinea, and Luzon emblazoned on for all places that the regiment had fought. The combat record of the regiment was outstanding, and those Auburn men who served with it will never be forgotten and take a much-deserved pride in their military accomplishments during World War II.
This is my rifle. There are many like it, but this one is mine. My rifle is my best friend. It is my life. I must master it as I must master my life. In battle, my rifle without me is useless. Without my rifle, I am useless. I must fire my rifle true. I must shoot straighter than my enemy, who is trying to kill me. I must shoot him before he shoots me. I will. My rifle and I know that what counts in this war is not the rounds we fire, nor the noise of our burst, nor the smoke we make. We know that the hits are what count. We will hit. I will know my rifle as I know myself. I will learn its weaknesses, its strength, its parts, its accessories, its sights, and its barrel. I will ever guard it against the ravages of weather and damage, as I will ever guard my arms, my legs, my eyes, and my heart. I will keep my rifle clean and ready. We will become part of each other. We will. Before God, I swear this creed.
Before God, we swear this creed.
So be it.
So be it.
Until victory is ours.
Until victory is ours.
And peace again rules the world.
And peace again rules the world.
In 1997, Festival Plaza was created as part of the 1997 Auburn Downtown Action Plan for Tomorrow, with the vision of revitalizing the town. It was designed by Boston's Icon Architecture and is a vibrant and artistic civic focal point. It conveys a 21st century interpretation of the New England Commons. In 1998, a very devastating ice storm struck. It became known as the Great Ice Storm of 1998. During this storm, 5 inches of freezing rain hit parts of Canada and New England, including Auburn. The storm caused major damage to trees, buildings, and electrical systems, leaving millions of people without power for days, weeks, or months. It induced 35 casualties and left around 700,000 Maine residents without electricity. Somali immigrants in the United States began a secondary migration to Maine from other states due to the area's low crime rate, good schools, and cheap housing. They came to the Lewiston-Auburn area. In 2011, there were an estimated 5,000 Somali immigrants residing in the Lewiston-Auburn area. Additionally, according to the Immigrant Research Center, there were approximately 7,500 immigrants from East Africa in Androscoggin County. This has had a large impact on the Lewiston-Auburn region by adding in new cultures. In recent years, a Chinese investment company, Central Maine Medical Center, and city and state officials heralded what they call a unique opportunity. A former shoe mill in Auburn, Maine is set to become a 5-star medical tourism facility that caters to wealthy Chinese. The plan was first announced Friday, July 31st, 2015 at a press conference between the investment company, CMMC, and city and state officials. The investor behind the project is Miracle Enterprise, a group that has a number of healthcare initiatives in China. According to management representative Michelle Zhu, their target clients are wealthy Chinese individuals who, upon their arrival at the future 5-star facility, will get complete workup on their health. The facility will have a 200-room recovery center that will be able to house at least 5,000 guests per year. This will cause a massive influx of not only newfound revenue for the city of Auburn, potentially revitalizing it, but also an influx of new Chinese culture. 2019 is the sesquicentennial of Auburn, Maine, and now, as we look back on our history, we realize that we have had tough times and we have had great times. Though everything that has happened to us has also happened for us. It has improved us and made us a stronger city, and although this documentary may now be concluding, this is not the end of our history, but it is the continuation. To end with a quote from Winston Churchill, "Now, this is not the end. It is not even the beginning of the end, but it is, perhaps, the end of the beginning."